Message in a bourbon bottle.
Welcome back to Message in a Bourbon Bottle. I am Chad Watson, clearly not Chad Perkins. Hopefully you can tell the difference between me and him, or he and I, rather. But we have a new question this week, and let's dive in. Chads, I have a long-standing question that I've never found the answer to. Everyone knows that dusty whiskey tastes considerably different than modern whiskey. I think that's a given. So here's my question. Did dusty whiskey always taste that way? Dusty? Or did it change in the bottle over time? It's widely said that whiskey changes in the barrel alone, but once it's bottled, it no longer changes. However, I have bottles that get better over time after opening them. Letting them have air, time, headspace in the bottle, etc. does have impact. So could we expect that 20 plus years in a sealed bottle have some effect as well? And that comes from John, who emailed us at itsbourbonnight@gmail.com, where if you would like to submit for Message in a Bourbon Bottle, you can do so. But please put Message in a Bourbon Bottle in the subject line. And once again, that's itsbourbonnight@gmail.com. So yes, John, things do change once they're bottled. I always say the best version of something is once it's bottled. Clearly, things change in the barrel over time, and that's why a 1 year, 2 year, 4 year, 20 year don't taste the same. What a lot of people think of as a neck pour is literally the liquid sitting in a neck, and that doesn't change. But what I like to always reiterate to everyone is wine. We decant wine, or if you drink wine, you decant wine. Why do you do that? So you decant wine to introduce oxygen to bring out flavors and tannins, and maybe even ease up on flavors and tannins because it might be overly tannic or dry or spicy. But adding oxygen to the wine will clean it up and bring out new flavors. Whiskey's no different. So we're in the year 2025 currently. If you have a bottle from 2020, 2015, 2010, 2005, those bottles have oxygen in them. So when liquid goes into the bottle, the pressure of what's in the bottle, typically by volume, is what stops it from hitting above 750 or whatever the bottle volume is. Once the seal goes in there, or once a cork or a cap or a screw cap or whatever you want to call it goes into that bottle, it is sealed, therefore locking in the oxygen in that bottle. If that bottle sits for half a decade, 2 decades, 3 or 4 decades, you can expect, like a barrel, that the oxygen eventually will deteriorate due to the ethanol in the bottle, or if it's not sealed properly, the ethanol will evaporate, which is what causes dusty bottles to lose whiskey, which is why some bottles are 3/4 of the way full, half the way full, or whatever. A big part of that is and I probably should have done the research on this at some point in time to memorize it, but there is a bacteria, and it's not like a bad bacteria, it's just something found in vintage whiskeys, Scotch and Irish and Japanese and bourbon, etc., that has been found to give similar flavors, those floral, dirt, barnyardy, oaky wood flavors, and that could come from several different things. So we all have to remember, mind you, that today we use a GMO corn, yellow dent number 2. We have to use what's called RO water, reverse osmosis, because it's completely flushed of all impurities and minerals and everything. So it's the most clean version of water you can get. Back in the day, we don't know what they used. So there was a time when yellow dent number 2 became the standard. There was a time when RO water became the standard, but there was never like a defining day between both of those options. And also we have to take into account oak. The trees back in the day that, we would harvest to make the barrels could be 150, 200, or 300 years old. And now today they're not just 20 or 30, but we do rapid growth trees. Some of them are 5 years, some of them are 7 years, some of them are 10 years. There's a limit depending on where they're harvested from. What decides that? There's not really a set standard across the board, but every state has their own laws. One big thing to think about is when you put all those factors together, say you take a bottle from, the 1960s, in the heyday of bourbon before we hit, the glut of the 80s, which that's a whole different message in a bourbon bottle if someone ever wants to ask whatever happened there. Bourbon and American whiskey back then were considered premium products, such as today. All alcohol is a luxury, mind you, but the idea being back then that something we look at today might be $1,000 bottle because it's vintage and dusty is because of that environment and that grain structure and that yeast and that water and all that. We can't replicate that today. I mean, I'm sure there's a way we can, the science behind it, but we also have to look at, we are very much more restricted because, the FDA, they kind of have a say in that. But before we go more into that, let's talk about our home away from the internet, which is whiskyandbishes.com, where you can get the shirt that I'm wearing, the glassware that I'm typically holding, the water glass that I would usually show you right here, bottle cut candles, hoodies, hats, and so much more. Also, patreon.com/itsbourbonnight for as little as $1 a month. You can join Patreon and you can suggest messages in a bourbon bottle, Q&As, ideas for episodes. You can get first dibs at barrel picks and discounts on the merch that I mentioned. Once again, that's at patreon.com/bourbonnight. So we're going to hop right back into the message in a bourbon bottle right after this. So back into why things taste different. So as the liquor, so to speak, sets in a bottle, so like this bottle here, the cork that would be in here, it would be filled up to about there. And if that sits in there for 40 years and that cork is airtight, there's no way for oxygen to escape. What happens to that oxygen? The ethanol devours it. So you're left with a more pure, in my opinion, version of that whiskey, where you get those funky floral, dusty brown sugar notes. And, dusty bourbon refers to dust on the bottle, not the dusty taste in your mouth or whatever. The original term for dusty is the outside of the bottle. The things on the inside of the bottle is kind of up for debate. But as oxygen leaves that bottle, or as ethanol leaves that bottle, and that volume goes down, it's just like a barrel. So the bottle is, in an essence, just like the barrel. It's not aging anymore, but it is changing just the same. So you take a barrel and you put it in a humid climate, the ethanol is going to go first, and the water is going to be larger, which means the proof goes down, and you're not losing as much volume inside that barrel. So you have a higher yield but a lower proof. You have a barrel that is losing more water than ethanol, the proof goes up. The great thing about that is people love high proof, they love short barrels. Not so much whenever it comes to dusty bottles. That is a little more expensive. But the same idea there is to play. So if something is stored properly and, not in sunlight, and it's not in a super damp climate or a super dry climate, and it's climate controlled, you're going to get the best version of that whiskey that was bottled. Like I said in the beginning, the best version of something is once it's bottled. Hopefully I said that. I think I said that. But my saying is the best version of something is when it's bottled, not from the barrel, not from a tote or whatever. It's always from the bottle, because that's the truest form of that whiskey. Same thing goes for Dusties. The best version of that whiskey is from that bottle. It just depends on how that bottle was stored. If it was done so in a bad way, it's going to be a bad whiskey. If it was done so properly, it'd be a great whiskey. Maybe, unless they distilled it terribly and it just was not a good whiskey to begin with. But you can't judge all bottles or all Dusty bottles from one tasting. Everyone stores them differently. Not everyone from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s or early 2000s had the same access or ways to store things as we do today, or even if we do today, people in 20, 30, 40, 50 years will even care about. But the great thing there is a uniqueness to a Dusty, and same thing with having a bottle open for a period of time. You open a bottle, you find it ethanol, it's astringent, it's pungent, it's harsh. Oxygen there will help combat that, because as the bottle's opened up, more oxygen gets in there, the ethanol will evaporate, it kind of cleans itself up. Now, it's a ticking time bomb after that, because we don't know how long it's good for. It could get cloudy because of bacteria and could get infected. You don't spend your money to have a cloudy or funky bottle of whiskey. But to round it all out, the one thing about Dusty whiskey is it's always a gamble. But that's the fun thing about the whiskey industry, is there will always be vintage whiskey. There will always be Dusties. It just depends on what's left from today. The things from yesteryear might not be here in 50 years, but what's going to be the dusty or vintage whiskey from today? So if you plan on living a long life, which I hope you do, and I hope everyone watching does, grab a bottle of something you hope to find in 20 years or 10 years or 5 years and compare that to what you bought today or yesterday or 5 years ago and see how that changes. Do the experiment yourself. Put it in your closet, in your basement, in your attic, and just kind of see how things change. Because that's the only real way to know what affects it. And that's something we can all easily do for 10, 20 bucks. Granted, we could spend 5 or 10 years doing so. It's an easy way to see how things change and do the experiment yourself. But that's where we better leave it. So if you've not done so already, please subscribe by clicking right here. And there's also videos down here. Hopefully I'm in them. If not, then still watch them. And, of course, drink more bourbon.
That we get your message in a bourbon bottle. Yeah.